Columbian is pleased to welcome candidate for state treasurer. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going to butcher this. Mike Pellicciotti.
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
It took me a lot longer to learn it, Greg.
Exactly. I'm Greg Jane, editorial page editor at the Columbian. And Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
I am Scott Campbell. My role now is I'm the retired publisher of the Columbian and recently, so that's it.
So, and member of the editorial board. And then Craig?
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian. So is everybody else seeing all of Mike's face, or is it just me that can only see the bottom half?
Kind of. Yeah, Mike, your forehead's cut off a little bit. So if you, there you go.
Oh, that's much better. Thank you. So I'd hate to have you go through the interview and not look your best.
Thanks, Craig.
Great. Again, thank you for joining us. As we mentioned, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website. And I should mention that a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed incumbent Dwayne Davidson, and you had some technical difficulties. I'm glad you're able to join us today, but his interview is already posted on our website. So we will have both candidates available for our readers. And with that, Mike, why don't you take just 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourself, and maybe give a little background and explain why you were running, and then we'll move on to specific policy questions. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you to the editorial board for having me today. Again, my name is Mike Pellicciotti. I am currently the Democratic candidate for state treasurer. Before joining the legislature in 2016, I managed, as an assistant attorney general, I managed a state unit of financial examiners, auditors, and analysts that returned over $30 million back to taxpayers from financial fraud. I joined the state legislature in 2016. While in the state legislature, my focus has really been on issues of financial transparency. I passed legislation and introduced laws to get dark money out of Washington state politics. I passed legislation to have more political action committee transparency, so you know the actual donors related to political action committees. I passed my Corporate Crime Act, which increased financial penalties against corporations for the first time in nearly a century. And obviously, I was the first state legislator to voluntarily provide my public records as a part of being a state elected official. I was the first to call on the legislature to vote against its attempt to hide its public records, and was the first to call on the governor to veto the legislature's attempt to hide its public records. So issues of financial transparency are very important to me. And the position of state treasurer is probably the most important position in state government to have issues of financial transparency and trust related to the position. So, you know, a lot of the focus I have related to the position of state treasurer is focusing on these issues of financial transparency. I feel we can do a lot more related to making it so that people actually know what's happening with their own state finances. I hear from constituents all the time that they don't know how their money's being spent. It's not entirely clear how the money's moving. I have a range of different proposals to have more essentially transparency, both in terms of how the state investment board operates. Right now, there is all those meetings are held on without them being online. They're not. TVW covers pretty much everything in Washington, but there's no video recording of the state investment board meetings. You have to do a public records request if you want to get the audio recording related to what takes place. I mean, this is a group that invests over $100 billion of taxpayer money. It invests more money in a year than the state legislature allocates in 2 years, or arguably almost in 4 years. And yet there's not enough transparency related to that. I want to do what we're doing in Pennsylvania, or what the state treasurer is doing in Pennsylvania, to have a transparency portal so that people actually know how their money's moving and how it's being spent, including making it so that there is more clarity related to who's benefiting from the money that's being spent, like what elected officials are actually receiving contributions from the same entities that are receiving state contracts and receiving other state resources. And I wanted to make sure that there's more transparency related to the Public Deposit Protection Commission, which the treasurer manages. So we actually make sure all those meeting minutes are online, because that's the regulation of banking that's done by the state treasurer. Since joining the legislature, I've always said no to corporate donations. I'm one of the only state elected officials in Washington who has never accepted corporate donations. And it's allowed for me to lead on a lot of these transparency issues. There is no position in state government where it is more critical not to have corporate campaign donation entanglements than position of state treasurer that is responsible for investing over $100 billion, often in the same corporations that for years have donated to the campaigns of state treasurer. And I'm going to finally put an end to that longtime practice of allowing state treasurers to accept money from the same corporation that they're investing money in. I just feel it's fundamentally wrong. And so much of this work, I think, involves showing up. Obviously, I do think it is a problem that the incumbent is not showing up to the majority of the meetings that actually the boards and commissions related to so much of the work of the office. The State Investment Board, he's only personally attended 3 of the last 21 of those meetings. The previous state treasurer, Jim McIntyre, personally attended every one except for one meeting, which he relied on the emergency coverage exception of the statute to send staff to be in his place for that one meeting. Jim McIntyre, Treasurer McIntyre, chaired the board. It was so important to be addressing these issues. And his predecessor, Mike Murphy, just revoked his endorsement of the incumbent over the fact that the incumbent has had, in his words, such horrid attendance related to the State Investment Board. This is the work of the office, as is other things that protect the financial security of the people of the state of Washington. The GET program, for example, Guaranteed Education Tuition Program, where so many people invest their savings to allow for the kids to be able to go to school. The current incumbent has attended fewer of those meetings than any treasurer in state history. And this treasurer has only served one term. All those other treasurers served multiple terms. This isn't just about showing up for meetings. This is about making sure you're actually doing the work. And there are consequences to the failure to attend a lot of these meetings. And I'll give one example: the Housing Finance Commission, in which the Housing Finance Commission makes sure that there's affordable housing, make sure that there's senior continuous care funding, so that folks in the silver tsunami at various stages as they advance in years have appropriate housing. The incumbent missed one of those meetings in 2017, in which his absence from that meeting led to a lack of a quorum by one member and the cancellation of that meeting. And as a result, the Tukwila Senior Village Center did not receive the financing that was supposed to take place at that meeting. I mean, there are consequences.
And Mike, I'm curious about this. So when he doesn't attend meetings, does he send a surrogate? Is there an assistant in attendance usually?
So obviously the example I just gave, he did not send anyone in his place.
Right, but usually.
To that meeting. So there have been several meetings where there have been no attendance. At the majority of the meetings, he has sent people from his staff to attend related to those meetings. But I was giving the example related to Jim McIntyre before. The staff joined Jim McIntyre to those meetings too. There's nothing stopping staff from joining the treasurer to these meetings. The issue is there's essentially an abdication that's taken place where he's relied on these emergency coverage statutes and kind of turned them on their head and essentially has turned over all of these job responsibilities and the votes that take place at these meetings to staff. I mean, these aren't just meetings where you're sitting and attending. These are meetings where there are votes taking place, and the people have entrusted and put the treasurer on these boards. The treasurer is designated to serve on these boards. And so it's not that all the deputies and assistants in the office don't have the same authority as the state treasurer. That's statutorily granted to all the deputies and assistants. Otherwise, they couldn't cut checks. They couldn't do the work of the office. They have the same powers as the state treasurer. But what's happened in a rather unprecedented way is we have a state treasurer who just who has turned over the office to staff to attend these meetings and do these votes on his behalf. And look, I attended the last 2 state investment board meetings. These meetings are critical to addressing the financial well-being of our state. At the July meeting that the incumbent missed, in which he sent his assistant treasurer instead, there was nothing else on the treasurer's calendar at all. This is not an issue of having more important things to do. This is an issue of just different priorities. At the June meeting, the first meeting of the State Investment Board, in which the State Investment Board was dealing with a $6 billion loss in the first quarter to our pension returns, a $6 billion loss. The first meeting after the recession was declared in our state, At the exact same time during the day, the incumbent was holding a fundraiser with bank lobbyists and accepted a maximum contribution check from the bank lobby at the exact same time that meeting was going on. In my mind, it's a disqualifier. These are issues that are that the people of the state of Washington are expecting their treasurer to show up to be addressing. And again, his predecessor hardly ever missed a meeting. There was only one incident that we know of where he had to have emergency coverage, and he chaired the board. It was so important. And again, Mike Murphy, his predecessor, has revoked his endorsement he gave of the incumbent this year. He revoked that endorsement based on this org attendance.
Now,
this is the work of the state treasurer.
Wayne said regarding this issue that one, his staff is fully qualified and certainly able to attend the meetings, and two, he argued that having a qualified staff and allowing to delegate more gives him more time to focus on national treasurer issues. What would you say to that?
Well, first I'd say do your state job first before doing national efforts. I'm not sure what attending national conferences does for the state of Washington, other than allows for you to go to 5-star resorts, to attend national conferences. And let's be clear, when you look at his appointment list, he is doing other things instead. He is not attending or doing some higher calling. He is doing things when he was missing these Housing Finance Commission meetings. He had at the same time on his calendar the fact that he had a barber appointment. He was attending the state fair. He was giving a Republican speech. He was traveling to meet with Republican groups. He, as I was mentioning earlier, he was holding a fundraiser with bank lobbyists during the day. It is beyond disingenuous for him to give any implication that he is doing something in greater service to the people of the state of Washington when these meetings are going on.
Now, aside from making sure, so are you saying that you would make sure that you attend all those meetings?
Yes.
Okay. In addition to that, how would you approach the job? What would you do differently? And how are Washington's finances right now?
Sure. Well, and this goes to the heart. I mean, Washington's finances, like many other states, are in a real challenge. Let's talk about treasurer managed investments specifically. Over the last 2 years, the Treasurer Managed Investment Fund, the local government investment pool that the treasurer is entirely responsible for managing, has had a 90% drop in returns in just the last 2 years. 90% drop in return. I mean, we're talking about right now a return on what is almost a $20 billion investment pool it's about 0.17% return when it was over 2% just 2 years ago. The state of Oregon's same investment pool that has the same liquidity, the same cautious conservative investments to make sure that those investments are protected. State of Oregon's returns are at 1% right now. Now, look, I mean, states are all over the place related to these investments, and a lot of this is because interest rates have dropped so much. But at the same time, I do think there needs to be an immediate looking at the treasurer's advisory group that he's put together with this, and why we're not having the same returns as the state of Oregon. What I also say is related to the State Investment Board, where it's a board that is that has incredible talent as a part of it. It's a large board, but right now the returns on the State Investment Board are the worst in a decade. This is one of these situations.
Points the State Investment Board.
So the state investment, essentially the legislature does, in the sense that, I shouldn't say the legislature does. I mean, it's statutorily appointed, I should say. So the treasurer sits on the State Investment Board. 2 members of the legislature, one from the House of Representatives and one from the Senate, are on the State Investment Board. They're appointed by the majority caucuses of the two houses.
So if returns aren't that robust, is that the treasurer's fault?
Well, if he's not showing up to the meetings, I guess I don't know what to say. He's not there. This is a challenging situation. I mean, this is one of the most significant economic crises we have seen in our lifetimes. You could not keep me from these meetings. I mean, I attended the last 2 meetings related to this. When I was at the July meeting, it was one of the most insightful meetings. I mean, the state of Washington is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on various consultants and experts in finance who come and consult and give information to the State Investment Board on how to address issues of our economic challenges. it almost should be required attendance for anyone who is dealing with our state finances, and most certainly should be for the state treasurer, and has been consistently an obligation and responsibility for the state treasurer to be leading these efforts. To finish answering your question, the rest of the board is appointed by people who are in various affected groups. So in other words, someone who represents retired teachers, someone who represents required first responders, people who are in the various different retirement groups, and those are appointed by the governor. But it's the treasurer who's the only person on that board who represents the people of the state of Washington entirely, the only person. And it's the same with these other boards and commissions, things like the Economic Development Finance Authority, which provides small business assistance through various loans that are provided. The state treasurer has not personally attended a single meeting of that since the end of 2018. I mean, I mentioned the GIT committee before, the Housing Finance Commission before. I mean, so much of the work is the fact that the state treasurer is designated and assigned to every one of these boards and is the only unifying voice on all of these fiscal committees. That's the key critical component, is the state treasurer is the unifying financial leader on all of these efforts. And so, sure, I mean, I understand the idea that staff is at some of these meetings. It's a different staff member at nearly all of these meetings, and it's that is denying the continuity and consistent leadership that's supposed to be taking place. And
looking ahead, what kind of asks would you have for the legislature next year?
Well, to do what the bond rating agencies are expecting. I mean, I think the role of the state treasurer is to provide financial guardrails to the legislature. The power of the state legislature is only as significant as the legislature actually listens to the state treasurer and respects what the state treasurer has to say. And so what the bond rating agencies have said related to addressing addressing our budget challenges is using appropriate budget tools, which in my mind includes both revenue and appropriate reductions, relying on federal funding to take place, and a measured drawdown of the rainy day fund, the budget stabilization account. That is the expectation related to the bond rating agencies. They've also indicated that there should not be any budget gimmicks in how to address it. It should be a long-term addressing of some of the budget challenges. The role of the state treasurer is to clearly communicate that. I have a long history of taking independent but principled stances in the legislature on some of the issues I've talked about, public records, on dark money transparency, on card tab reform, on a range of issues that ultimately, in most of those situations, have led the legislature actually follow what I've said, even though it was very unpopular to be the only person standing forward and doing that. I believe I have the credibility within the legislature. I've served on fiscal committees in the legislature. I'm on the capital budget committee in the legislature. And I think it's a fundamental difference between my opponent and me, which is he has hired a contract lobbyist to meet with the legislature and do his legislative work. He also has a governmental affairs person in the office, like most offices do. But in addition, he is using tax dollars to pay for a contract lobbyist. That is not going to get the job done. It's fundamentally not. And again, it's an abdication of the duties of the state treasurer. Those previous state treasurers were involved in the budget discussions for these reasons. It's so critical that during the budget process, the legislative leaders are listening to what the treasurer says related to those guardrails. And you can't send a contract lobbyist in to do this work. I mean, it's almost beyond any comprehension. And I think that's part of the difference between me having legislative experience and knowing that and being willing to meet and do that work, opposed to the incumbent who doesn't have that legislative experience.
Do you have experience as a treasurer or a financial manager?
So, I've managed legal financial issues. I've managed a unit within the state attorney general's office that actually addresses a lot of these similar financial issues. In terms of, I have not been a county treasurer. Now, again, the majority of state treasurers in our history have not been. 5 of the last 7 state treasurers have come out of the House of Representatives. There's a reason for that. It's because of the need to address these budget issues. It's not just there is a difference in the role of kind of the administrative role that exists at a county level, opposed to a state treasurer that is dealing with these issues of international finance, is dealing with issues related to legislative and budget issues, is dealing with issues related to key financial policy issues through the work of these boards and commissions, and making sure that the financial needs are taking place, and that there's an awareness of what those needs are, those policy needs are. And so there's a reason that both the people of the state of Washington have consistently expected legislative experience in some way, and then at the same time have also made sure that there has been, I think the other experience that is necessary, which is a lot of the economic experience and some of the background that I bring, the academic background I have on economic development and other issues like that the state treasurer doesn't have that same experience.
Craig or Scott?
Sure. I am about to get my ballot, and I'm trying to figure out how to vote on Resolution 8212. Can you help me out?
Well, related to the constitutional.
Yes. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. So if we're referring to the issue related to the long-term care investments and the constitutional change related to that, that is something I support and that I'll be voting for. I do think that it goes back to the importance of the State Investment Board. I mean, what that is talking about is saying that this long-term care bill that I supported needs to be managed in a way that allows for long-term assets to accumulate in the same way we deal with the GET program. In the same way we do with other kind of workers' comp investments, the same needs to take place with the Long-Term Care Act. And that is, again, why the State Investment Board is so important. You can't be ignoring these efforts. So that look, it's something I support. I do think it's going to pass, but and then I'm going to show up as state treasurer and make sure that money is being appropriately invested.
So the equities give us a chance to earn a better return than that 0.17%.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially over the long term. I mean, these are investments like pension dollars that are over a significant long term, where you need to have those long term returns.
Scott, have anything?
No, good discussion. Good discussion here.
Well, I'll keep going then. So then, Mike, what is your biggest fear right now regarding the state's finances?
Well, I think there are a number of challenges we're facing right now. I mean, obviously, we have challenging returns related to the State Investment Board. I think the legislature has worked very hard to more fully fund our state pensions than other states have. I think that is something that is very important because it has reduced some of the debt obligations that the state has. Often when the debt obligations are looked at related to the state, it has not considered the fact that the state pension dollars are as significantly funded as they are, almost 87 to 90% funded by the state legislature. And again, part of that funding is also has been in years past the appropriate returns and good returns that have come from the State Investment Board. When instead of having returns of 6 or 7%, we're instead losing $6 billion in the first quarter. That is a strain that affects what I had hoped, and is part of my goal, is making sure we're fully funding our pension obligations. And a plan that had hoped to do that by about 2027. Obviously that creates challenges. There is a major strain on local governments right now. I think that is something else that's a concern. When I was mentioning the local government investment pool, the lower interest rates have been a disaster in terms of the returns that those local governments rely on when they park their funds. When they put their funds into local government. What
can the treasurer's office do to help those local governments?
Well, making sure and working on the local government investment pool to make sure the return is as high as possible. I mean, when there's a 90% drop in returns, just in a few years, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of loss spreading around. I was just talking to a Buren City Council member last night where they're feeling the pinch. And it's not just a cumulative, impact, which obviously is the case when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. We're saying it's affecting the bottom lines of individual state governments right now who are trying to get by. So that is something that's important. I do think with the local government investment pool in Oregon, for example, even though, again, there has to be total liquidity related to those funds, and there needs to be a very the most cautious conservative investments you can do, that their local government investment pool does have some financial professionals as a part of that advisory group, which at least from what I can see in the state of Washington, it does not. Now, what I will say is the local government investment pool does not, at least that I have seen, post its minutes to these meetings. That is a problem. This goes back to the fundamental issues of financial transparency. It's hard for us to even critique how we could be doing better if we don't know how these $20 billion are the decision, all the details related to these $20 billion that are being invested. And so I think everything comes back in my mind to issues of financial transparency, and making sure that then we bring the best and the brightest together to address some of these issues. And I think that one of the things that always energizes me related to these issues of financial transparency is it often leads to better policy. So, on the example I was given before on my bills to get dark money out of Washington politics, and then my bill the following year to have political action committee transparency, we had a legislative, there's a Senate seat taking place in South Pierce County, for example, in which for the first time a political ad had to actually disclose who the actual donors are. So it's no longer just friendly sounding PAC names where it says, we love, Clark County PAC, brought to you by, top 3 donors. We love, Vancouver PAC. We love Canvas PAC. It instead actually identifies individual donors. And what's happened is the policies have changed among those groups that were called out on what, in my opinion, was a very racist ad that was issued. And a lot of the groups that were then associated with that ad were called to task related to that. And then they changed their policies in terms of how they actually involve themselves in the political process and the decision making that takes place. And I feel the same way with our state finances. When you have that transparency, better decisions will be made and there'll be more accountability related to it. And with public financing, it's that much more important. And ultimately, better policy is made when there's more financial transparency.
Now, what about Dwayne said that the state has achieved a AAA bond rating for the first time. Is that accurate?
For one of the 3 bond rating agencies, the other 2, that's not the case. For one of the 3, okay. And look, I hope he gave appropriate credit to the Office of Financial Management and the legislature for doing that. I don't know if he did. I guess what I would say is I would expect that to be the case, because that is part of the job of those 3 different groups. The Office of Financial Management, one of the largest, essentially, financial organization groups in Olympia. And obviously the legislature, which does the budgets, that is probably arguably the most, if not the most, one of the most important criterion considered by the bond rating agencies. They also identified quite clearly the diversity of our economy, and the technology aspects that we have. The fact we have Amazon here and Microsoft here and Starbucks here. They were critical of Boeing given some of the challenges that they were facing, but they were talking about the diversity of our economy. Now, the other thing they also highlighted before changing the bond rating agency, specifically related to Moody's, which is what I think he was probably referencing, is the fact that prior to that that bond rating change, the legislature had not addressed the McCleary obligation. And they were quite clear that that was a material risk. There was a constitutional obligation without an understandable, reliable, consistent source of funding to address one of the largest budget challenges for the state. And they said, you need to address that. You need to address that. And the legislature did. And lo and behold, the bond rating agencies did what they said they would do, and they were consistent. They said, your economy's strong, you're showing good fiscal management, you've addressed this material risk. And based on the legislative action, as well as the overall strength of the Washington state economy, the bond rating went up. So, look, I guess what I will say is this. As I work to increase the bond rating agencies and work with the legislature to make sure we're showing good fiscal management, when those go up, I'm sure coming before you in 4 years and taking credit for that as well. But at the same time, it shows how interconnected this all is, how you need to be working with the state legislature, how you need to be working with the Office of Financial Management, and you need to be a respected voice related to it. The incumbent opposed the McCleary fix put forward by the legislature. The legislature didn't listen to him related to that, and here we are. And things are generally good on that front. But it is important that the legislature continue to show appropriate fiscal prudence. And bond rating agencies have highlighted that in Washington. Look, we balance our budgets, and there's a degree of respect that we've shown general fiscal prudence in that sense. And so
Right.
I think that's something that's important, but then also the guardrails on how to do that, not doing with budget gimmicks, which I think is important.
Mhm. Great. Mike, we'll move along. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements.
Sure. Well, look, I guess, I'll start with the fact that I will show up and do the job. I have, the broad experience to address these issues. I think that this is an important time now more than ever to make sure we have all hands on deck. To me, it is not okay under any objective assessment to not be showing up and doing everything that the people of the state of Washington expect the state treasurer to be leading on. In terms of notable endorsements, I am endorsed by the last state treasurer, Jim McIntyre, as well as elected officials throughout the state. I'm the, I guess, both in terms of statewide elected officials, I'm endorsed by the range of people that you would expect to care about a position of state treasurer. But one of the other things that I do think is important and is worth pointing out is once again this week, we're dealing with federal challenges where the federal government and the president in particular has threatened federal stimulus funds that interconnected with the work of state treasurer. The president has specifically said that the state essentially that he may withhold these state federal dollars related to federal dollars that our bond rating agencies are expecting us to have. The state treasurer should be saying right now as loudly as the state treasurer can that this is not okay and is a material risk to maintaining our bond rating agencies. The bond rating agencies are expecting federal dollars to be coming through. I mean, just a month ago, the president threatened to withhold federal funding from the largest city in the state in a way that's incredibly impactful. And we have a state treasurer that has supported Donald Trump for president. And I think that is something that is a distinction and is worthy of pointing out in terms of these important issues that we need to make sure that we're standing up and addressing those issues. But I guess what I would just say in closing. Oh, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I do want to clarify, Dwayne 4 years ago said he would support Trump. This time he is declining to say one way or the other. So I think it's fair to clarify that.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, what he might be saying to an editorial board, or the impression he's giving to an editorial board, is not the impression he's been giving to Republican groups in the state. I mean, he is specifically.
Go ahead. I don't want to belabor that point.
Okay. But so, and what I will say is this, is, I think so many of these issues related to state treasurer involve showing up and making sure that the state treasurer is doing the job related to this. And so I guess what I will say is, I really believe that, these kind of complicated legal financial issues require all hands on deck. And it's something that I'm looking forward to doing as next state treasurer.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
So good to
Mike.
see you all.